Welcome to Module 4. This module is about network segmentation, the practice of dividing your OT network into zones with controlled boundaries between them. Before we talk about solutions, we need to be very clear on the problem we're solving. That's what this video is about, the flat network, what it looks like, and why it's a security liability that makes every other control you put in place less effective. So a flat network is one where all devices share a single subnet with no internal logical boundaries. Everything is on the same network. Everything can reach everything else directly, and there's no mechanism to control which devices are allowed to talk to which other devices. So in a flat OT network, you've got your PLCs, HMIs, engineering workstations, the historian server, corporate laptops, vendor equipment, printers, and anything else that's plugged into the network. They all share the same segment. A laptop in the break room can reach a PLC on the production floor by simply knowing its IP address. A vendor's maintenance laptop connected to the network for a firmware update has direct access to every other device on the same segment. This design was the norm in older SCADA installations, and it still exists throughout the industry. In many facilities, it's not even a legacy accident. It was the deliberate design when the systems were commissioned, because at that time, the OT network was physically isolated from everything else. A flat network in a physically isolated environment isn't inherently dangerous. A flat network connected to a corporate IT network, accessible via vendor remote access, or reachable from the internet is a very different story. On a flat network, a compromised device reaches everything else with no barriers. The relevant concept here again is lateral movement. After an attacker gains a foothold on one machine through, say, a phishing email or a USB drive or a vendor's infected laptop, an unpatched vulnerability on an exposed service, the next step for the attacker would be moving from that initial foothold to a higher value target. On a flat network, there's nothing to stop that movement. The attacker simply uses the network access they already have because every device is directly reachable from every other device. Think of a facility with no internal walls or doors or access controls, just one giant open floor. Anyone who gets past the front entrance goes anywhere. A visitor who tailgates in behind a contractor walks directly to wherever they want without challenge. That's a flat OT network. The front door, whatever perimeter control exists, is the only barrier. Once past it, movement is unrestricted. Real-world attacks demonstrate this consistently. In documented OT incidents, initial compromises of corporate laptops, engineering workstations, or internet-facing servers led to direct access to PLCs and SCADA systems. Not because the attackers broke through complex barriers, but because there were no barriers. After the initial foothold, they moved through the network the same way a technician would, because the network offered no way to distinguish between a legitimate technician and an attacker using legitimate credentials. There is another way to frame the flat network problem: blast radius. In process safety, when you think about a failure mode, you think about how far the consequences spread. A valve that fails closed causes a localized pressure problem. A catastrophic vessel failure has a much larger blast radius. The same concept applies to network security. On a flat network, the blast radius of any compromise is the entire network. One compromised device means every device is reachable. One set of stolen credentials means access to everything. There's no inherent reason why a compromised corporate laptop should affect a PLC on a production line 3 buildings away. But on a flat network, that's exactly what can happen. When Stuxnet spread through Iranian nuclear facilities, it traveled across facility networks using network shares and standard Windows mechanisms. The flat or minimally segmented networks in those facilities meant that once Stuxnet entered through one infection point, it propagated until it found the specific PLC model it was looking for. There were no barriers to slow that spread. So, what is our solution? Well, once you have zones, an attacker who compromises one device in one zone hits a barrier before reaching devices in another zone. The blast radius of a breach is contained to the zone where it occurred, or at least significantly limited. Detection becomes easier because you can monitor zone boundaries and alert on traffic that shouldn't be crossing them. VLANs are the primary tool for creating those zones in a single facility without purchasing separate physical infrastructure for each zone. Firewalls are the tool for controlling what's allowed to cross zone boundaries. We'll cover VLANs in the next video and firewalls in Module 5. The goal isn't to create a network so restricted that operations are impaired. The goal is a network where every permitted path across a zone boundary has a documented reason, and every traffic flow that doesn't have a reason is blocked. That's the principle of least connectivity, which we'll cover later in this module. Next, we'll talk about what a VLAN is and how it creates logical separation on the same physical hardware.